podcast. My name is Tim Niemeyer. Today I'm joined by Will Cragoe. Will, thank you for joining me on Zoom Out.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Tim.
Will is a local Bitcoiner here, co-host of the Lincolnland Bitcoin meetup. He is our resident OG. He is an adjunct math professor, and he has just a wealth of knowledge. He's presented for Lincolnland Bitcoin on math, on cryptography, and I wanted to bring him on today to help the listener kind of get an understanding of, as you put it, the math under the hood of Bitcoin. So, Will, I'd like to first start out, maybe give the listener an idea of your backstory. Like, you're before Bitcoin, what kind of led you towards being able to understand Bitcoin so early on?
Oh, thanks, Tim. So, yeah, early on, whenever I went to college, I didn't really know what I wanted to study. So I took, intro level classes. I took Calculus 1 and ended up really liking the calculus class. In fact, I ended up liking it so much that I wasn't supposed to take any more math for my undecided major and realized that I wanted to take more math because it was interesting. I thought, hey, I could teach high school with this. I had a lot of teachers that I really enjoyed in high school. One in particular, Mr. Butcher, he's amazing. So yeah, I switched majors and decided, all right, I'm going to study math, study education, and was going to be a math teacher. Kind of when I decided, when I didn't need to take math anymore, I decided that I wanted to. At some point, everybody figures it out somehow. That's just how I kind of figured it out, luckily, for me. So then I came back and started teaching. This is my 18th year as a high school teacher. It's been, I think, 10 years as an adjunct for Lincolnland. So for 10 years, I've taught undergraduate math classes, including Calc 1, Calc 2, and statistics to area high school students.
And for the listener, there is no affiliation between Lincolnland Community College and Lincolnland Bitcoin.
Not yet, but currently there's no connection.
Someday, really? I like that. Throw that in there.
Because ultimately, this is about education, and learning about technology and Bitcoin it's really important. I talk about it at high school, and the nice thing about teaching is I have an excuse to talk about it all the time, so it gives me a nice avenue. Once in a while, the kids will try to distract me too with, "Oh, Bitcoin doing," or "I saw this," They'll try to get me going on the tangents. So
of course they do.
I know I'll let them string me along sometimes.
Well, so you weren't always into Bitcoin though, and we were talking beforehand. I never put together the picture that you did your thesis on cryptography before you got into Bitcoin.
Yeah, and so I can tell you about that. So when I first started teaching, I just had a bachelor's degree, and I taught for a couple years, and then realized, hey, I kind of want to get a master's degree so I can A, get paid more, and B, teach like an upper level class, like a calculus or something like that.
Sure.
So I thought that'd be cool. So I started going to graduate school and commuting up to Illinois State. And it took me, I think I finished it in 2010 or January 2011, I finished up. So it took me just over 2.5 years.
Okay. And for the listener, Bitcoin had just came out live on 2009. So it's been around a few years, but still completely unknown to the mass.
Yeah, it was unknown to me, at the time too.
Right.
So I took some classes. One of the classes I really liked in grad school was an advanced number theory class, some of which is currently used on Bitcoin. Abstract algebra, also used on Bitcoin to a certain extent. And there came a time where I had to do some kind of like project. I wouldn't call it a thesis, but it's more like a project. But I did it on number theory, number theoretic methods in cryptography, and looked at, kind of from ancient times, what cryptography looked like, and kind of how we do it now and the math behind how it works. So one of the last things I talked about in the paper was elliptic curves, which I had known about at the time and kind of learned about and did some of the math and did a few examples in the paper. So later on, when I had heard about Bitcoin and was learning about it, which I could tell you more in a second, but I noticed, hey, they use elliptic curve cryptography, and I'm like, ding! Like I already known about that, so that once I made that connection in my mind, the fire was lit, so to speak.
So it was just a purely logical conclusion that if we can transfer money over the internet without any of the pitfalls of previous money using this cryptography, then therefore, were you into any other types of alternative current, like, because if you look at the prehistory of Bitcoin, it goes back 40 years. Were you into any of that cypherpunk stuff leading up to that, or was it just like
not really? No,
it was just the elliptical curve, bam.
I was thinking about it earlier today too, and usually when you first get into Bitcoin, you end up shitcoining also, right?
Yeah.
So we originally got into Bitcoin because my cousin who ran a tech company, I met with him and we had lunch. And I tried to get him to go to a fish show with me, but he couldn't come. He was all busy. But we met up and had lunch with him, and he showed me Coinbase and was talking to me about Bitcoin a little bit. And I'm like, what is this thing? Because like my wife and I had a little bit of money, and we're like, well, we should put this somewhere because it's not doing anything, just chilling in the savings account. It's a joke
Yeah.
what you make in the savings account monthly. So we initially bought some on Coinbase, and I started learning about it. And I don't think I was done shitcoining probably till 2018. It's like the first real, like when everything kind of was my first market cycle altogether. So we first bought some in 2016, bought some Ethereum, bought some Litecoin, oh my god, there's so many embarrassing shitcoins that I purchased. Hold on, my daughter. Yeah, I got it. But anyways, started getting it, started listening to podcasts and realizing, hey, the only thing that's going to be worth anything later is Bitcoin. Because all these other coins, once you learn about them and learn about the history of Bitcoin, they're all inferior for a variety of reasons. Pre-mine being the main thing. There's just a whole slew of reasons, these other coins aren't worth anything.
Sure.
They're going to be later.
And we can definitely get into that. And I do want to talk about elliptical curves. But elliptical curves, first of all, I'm an idiot when it comes to math. Are those synonymous? Can I say them both interchangeably?
Elliptic and elliptical, no, they're not actually interchangeable, okay. Unfortunately. Because an ellipse is like this sort of thing. It's like the egg shape, that's an ellipse.
Yep.
Right? But if you say elliptic, then you're talking about a class of algebraic equations.
Okay, so I should be saying elliptic. Thank you.
But there's a bunch of equations that go along with actual ellipses too. So, in fact, it's one of the things we used to teach to high school kids that we don't anymore is conic sections that we just don't teach anymore.
Interesting. So I need to go back to school, is what I'm taking away so far. So if we back up a little bit, you got us into 2018, but in 2017 you had you got a part of that run up, right?
Oh yeah, we didn't know what the heck was going on because when we first bought in, it was under 1,000. It had peaked at 1,000, whatever it was, a couple of years ago, and we ended up buying kind of right after the halving in 2016, which we didn't really know anything about until I started learning more about Bitcoin, of course. And yeah, we watched it that year 2017, just kind of charge forward, a few dips along the way, but when you zoom out and look at it, it's a perfect parabolic, very smooth.
Do you see any similarities to then and now? Now, I mean, 2024, and we're ETFs and are a thing now, and we've just seen this move just steady up, and we hit 29 just the day of this recording, and it's backed off, which it needs to take a breather. But do you see any similarities between the two?
Well, if we talk about charts eventually, because we're going to talk about models. I could talk about models for a minute too. But anyways, if you look at the linear, like the normal price chart from the start till now, like it looks like nothing happens right for a long time. It just does that, and then you kind of see a little blip, and then you see like the last couple of years. But it almost has a similar look to it. It almost looks like a bunch of like parabolas that almost look like waves crashing. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. So absolutely.
I think in charts all the time, so I can visualize what I'm talking about. Can I share my screen and stuff with you too?
You should be able to.
I don't have the chart up right now. But I can pop it. I can look at it real quick. Because on the linear scale, I can show the viewers, there's a bunch of different ways you can even look at like the lifetime price chart.
Well, and that's something that most people have a difficulty. I know I did when I first heard the difference between linear and logarithmic. To understand that. So let me see if I can, while you're bringing that up, if I can do my best to understand. Linear is best for measuring things that are that increase not in huge numbers. So from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 on up. And logarithmic is better for tracking large price movements. So from like 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000. Is that a very generic way of saying that?
So the log scale is better when you have multiple orders of magnitude of size numbers within the same data set, so to speak. So it's when there's a huge discrepancy or a huge difference in your numbers, the log scale can be visualized in a different way. So if I click share, will it share my screen?
Right.
Okay, let's try it. Share presentation. I'll also share the screen. I guess I'll share my entire screen because it won't take too long.
No OPSEC.
Once I can toggle between the two here. So there's the screen and the screen and the screen and the screen. Okay, nice.
There we go.
Okay, so you can see this. So this is CoinGecko, and I like CoinGecko now. We used to go to CoinMarketCap back in the day.
Yeah.
Then Binance bought it, so we don't like it anymore because they're going to put in all their wash trading.
Yeah, of course they are.
So there's CoinGecko, but if you look at, I clicked max up here on the price chart, and you can see kind of here's where we're at now. All right, so if you scroll to the bottom here, here's 2014. If you mouse over, it has data going back to 2013. Because it looks like nothing happens. Then here's the giant run up in 2017, giant run up in 2021, and it almost looks like it's doing again. Because at one point, this spike right here, at one point, is going to look like this. So in this price chart, you can kind of see like what you may have heard math people talk about as like a fractal shape, like it's similar to itself. Like if you zoom in on this area, it'll look kind of like this, which will look also kind of like this. If that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. So then,
let me click the log scale now. So right now, if you look at the y-axis scale here, here's 0,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. So it's going up by 10,000 every time.
Same increment.
All this action between 0 and 10,000 that happened earlier, you can't really see. So if you hit log, it's going to rescale it, and you get a much livelier picture from the start. That's all the same data, but now it's viewed differently. So you can really see the run up here in 2013, going from $100, almost 10xing there to 970, right, $1,000 almost.
Yeah.
But it just gives you more depth, other than seeing when you turn off the log scale, it smushes down all this stuff, and you don't see the up and down action there because it's squinched all between the 0 and the 10K.
So that if and when it goes to 100K, 200K, whatever, 2017 is going to go look like that. Just pretty much.
Exactly. It should just kind of look smaller as we have to scale higher to get to ideally new highs, right?
Awesome. So the takeaway from this is using log mainly because Bitcoin moves so incrementally. As it grows, it's not growing times one.
It's not growing in a linear slow fashion. No. To capture the movements, you need these different orders of magnitude to see it all.
Love it.
In the early days, there's a lot. I've heard OGs say they didn't think Bitcoin would ever be worth $1, and here we are.
How was
68,000 times.
Hal was saying it's going to be $1 million a coin, though. They weren't listening to Hal. They don't know what the hell they're talking about.
It's going to be $1 million a coin someday. The only problem is how much everything else is going to cost.
True.
And the reason I say that is because you and I know this, that they're going to print as much money as they need to cover all the debts, right? They're going to inflate the debt away. They're not going to default, which means fiat has no bottom. They'll print as many as they need to, which means Bitcoin can go as high as we want.
So then I'm going to go ahead and assume you're in the camp that we're rapidly approaching hyper Bitcoinization, where everything is priced in Bitcoin. You think that'll be?
It's happening, yeah. I think when you look at the price chart too, it took less time to recover. I feel like too. Let me look. I'm micing the price chart in the other window. So peak to peak, 2017 to 2021. That's 4 years. And then October of 2021 to now, it's not even 4 years later. 3 years later, we've hit a new all-time high. That's already never happened, right? A new all-time high before the halving hasn't happened, except now. And then it dipped immediately, which is, I expected that.
Well,
it's not going to shoot through the all-time high previously, I don't think.
I don't know if you saw, but
do this for a little bit, come check down, and then eventually we'll blast off.
Hey, y'all, are you need a Bitcoin? You looking for a way to safely and securely store your Bitcoin? Check out the Bitcoin Advisors. These Bitcoiners are professionals that will provide you peace of mind so you can sleep soundly at night knowing your Bitcoin is safe. Remember to tell them Zoom Out sent you. So I had a short medical emergency and we're back now. But we're talking about price. Everybody's going to live here. Doesn't matter if it goes down a little bit because logarithmically it shows that higher highs higher lows, going up exponentially. Eventually, we're going to get to a point of hyper-Bitcoinization. I'd like to switch now and kind of go back to the math of it.
Sure.
You mentioned the elliptic. Don't call me elliptical curves. Once you saw Bitcoin use those, that it just clicked for you. So
it seemed really cool.
What about elliptic curves does the average person need to know? Or like, why is it important if somebody's like talking about the value proposition of Bitcoin that even be in the conversation?
So at the end of the day, like the normal person, the average person isn't really going to care how it all works.
Sure.
They can rest assured knowing that it's based on mathematics that have been known and tested for a long time. So the basic idea with elliptic curves at the end of the day are just an algebraic class of functions. Okay. And they could have an infinite amount of points on them. They could be continuous, in which case there's an infinite amount of points, or it could be what's called a discrete curve, which is just a set of points.
Okay.
So it turns out there are certain classes of elliptic curves where you can define addition and subtraction of points on the curve in a way that allows you to encrypt information or encrypt or decrypt information. So essentially, the elliptic curve Bitcoin uses is just a whole bunch of data points, but it's a really big number. I don't even remember the thing off the top of my head. I have it in this. So a long time ago, not a long time ago now. I guess it's been about a year. So I made some slides on Bitcoin, the math under the hood, and let me just glance in there real quick, see if I can find it.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to put that link in the show notes to our Lincolnland Bitcoin meetup, where it was Bitcoin, the math under the hood. So elliptic curves allow us to encrypt and decrypt information without any chance of somebody taking it in the message in between. Is that right?
Essentially, yes. And it's computationally very difficult to undo the math. Even if you know the input and the output, it's still computationally very hard for you to try to undo that. Simply because it's going to take you too many guesses. Even with a really fast computer, it's going to take you too many guesses. You're never going to essentially guess the right number.
So I guess I get the whole, you don't need to know how cellular transmission works to use an iPhone, and you don't need to know how internal combustion works to drive a car. But there's not saying there's a little bit of trust me bro in this, but a lot of people hearing somebody say, the math is good, elliptic curves, go for it. So what is it doing in Bitcoin? How is that being applied to Bitcoin?
So let me share the thing with you, and I'll show you.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to say like, yeah, don't worry, it's not for you, it's not important. I'm trying to brush something on that rug. It says, in my experience, most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking about this kind of stuff.
I remember I was just enamored with your presentation, and then afterwards I realized I didn't take notes and I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. It is some higher level math stuff for sure, but the fact that there it is.
Can you see it now?
I can go for it.
Okay. Now go ahead. What else are you going to say?
No, the fact that it's mathematically provable that it's not. It is kind of
foundation.
Like it's the sound. Thank you, sound foundation. Go for it.
Yes, the theoretical foundation is solid, which is what I was about to show you here. So if I actually view the slideshow, we don't necessarily need all this information here. I just want to go to the group law. I wish I had it. I can't really fit it on one slide. But essentially, here's the basic idea. So in abstract algebra, there's a structure called a group. So it's an algebraic structure called a group. And to be a group, you have to have these four properties here, okay? So the basic idea is you have a set of numbers, okay? Could be very big, could be very small. In the case of Bitcoin, it's a very big set of numbers. All right, so here it says if P and Q are elements of this elliptic curve. So the way the elliptic curve is defined is it's an algebraic equation. It's really simple, and actually, look, there you go. Y squared equals x cubed plus 7. So at the end of the day, I really like the simplicity of this thing right here. You can see it. It's very simple. It doesn't look extremely complicated. But the graph I'm showing you here, this thing here is a continuous curve, okay? So Bitcoin does not use a continuous curve.
Okay.
Bitcoin uses a finite number of points on a similar looking curve. Like if you graphed all the points of this, it would roughly trace out this pattern. Can I switch slides from here? That'd be kind of sick if I could. No, it's okay. I'll go back to here. And there's some abstract algebra here. So the initial point is this 256-bit integer represented by OX, 79, etc., and it ends in that. That's what points on the curve look like. They're really, really big numbers written in hexadecimal, which is base 16. And there's a way to define adding, subtracting points on the curve so that it turns out adding, subtracting points on the curve create this group structure. Now, the reason I like this group structure is I will mention this to you down here on 3 and 4 in a second. But the basic idea is these elements in the set have to be closed. So if you take 2 points on the curve and then add them, it also has to be a point on the curve. So that assures you that when you put two things together, the third thing that you get automatically is in the set that you're dealing with. Okay, so it's called closed, so you don't get stuff outside of the set.
And for Bitcoin's sake, that's public and private keys, correct?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
And you can also think about these, like think about positive integers, right? Positive numbers. If you add two positive numbers, you get another positive number. Okay.
Okay.
There's also has to be an identity element. So it's called usually in addition we call it zero, because if you do like some number plus zero, it doesn't change anything. You just get the original number back. So there's a special point here. It's called the point at infinity. Hold on, I'm getting here. Point at infinity is our zero. So that's defined right here. And if we go back and I can kind of show you, what the point at infinity looks like. It's the point, think about the point as the very top. If you extend this all the way, it's quote at infinity. But it turns out defined in this way, you also get these two other properties. This inverse property is very important. So if there's a point on the curve, there exists some other point so that when you add them together, you get zero. So that's like saying you have an opposite. So like 5 plus negative 5 would be 0. So luckily, these specific points on this elliptic curve are chosen so that it has this property. Okay. And then the third one is the associate property, which you may remember. High school kids know this, and a long time ago when you learned about addition, you learned about this property too. So the idea is that you add 3 points on the
right now in their third grade math.
Yeah, so it's very foundational to what we do with numbers and operations. And it turns out with the elliptic curves, it works the same too. So if you have these 3 points, P, Q, and R on the elliptic curve, if you do P plus Q first, then do Q plus R first, it turns out it's the same, you end up with the same point.
Right.
Okay, the reason this is important is because then you can use this inverse property to undo something somebody sent you, and in essence, you can decrypt it and see what the message is supposed to be. And the way Bitcoin uses this to sign messages too, so you can sign message from an address using a signature scheme. And I don't think I detailed it in here. So here's a little bit of the algebra of how Bitcoin actually uses it here, and then how Alice can send a message to Bob. So in the number theory literature, it's always Alice and Bob.
Yeah.
Because of A and B, and that's close to my heart too, Alice and Bob. So here's kind of how it's defined on the elliptic curve. You have a whole bunch of points, 0, some starting point P, then double that, and so on up to n minus 1 times P. And this number is really big. It's incredibly big. You've probably heard the expression, there's enough Bitcoin addresses to give one to every grain of sand on Earth or something like that.
Or Andreas said something like there's enough Bitcoin addresses to give one to every grain of sand on every planet in the universe or some crazy like
some
that.
Some astronomically big number. So that's essentially how big this thing is here. It's really big.
Okay.
And then here it kind of talks about Alice choosing her private key, like her secret number. So it's just some random number in between the start and the end here, which is a huge range, like I said. All right, Bob has some private key that he picks, and then they have public key associated with it. So there's also some cryptography stuff I didn't really talk about here, but I just want to talk about this group law because this is the mathematical underpinning for why Bitcoin is able to work, is because of this associative property here, and because the inverse property. So Bob can compute a message, can send it to Alice, and then she can decrypt it without anybody else being able to do that. That's the short version of it that I could give you here. And
No,
let's
that's
see. I don't
great.
think there's any other slides on here. Well, that's pretty much it, and some memes on there. So, anyways,
Memes.
that's
We
the
need
slides
those.
for that. Here, I'll stop sharing here.
So then, when you hear people say, and I'm going to say like normies, for lack of a better word,
Mm-hmm.
when you hear them say, it's very asset centric, like Bitcoin's a Ponzi. And taking what you know from math and everything, like where does your mind go in those conversations? Do you want to just like drill, uh, this information down their throat, or
It depends, because in real life, if I heard somebody say that, I would try to talk their ear off about it, because usually they come from a place of not knowing what the heck they're talking about when they
right?
say something like that. They're angry at it for some reason, or they're bought and sold at a loss a long time ago, and now they're bitter that it's way higher.
Nostalgia.
I've seen a few cases like that, and I just feel bad for you. Like, dude, you can buy back in, but it's going to be more expensive than you first did. And like, some people just can't accept that. They'd rather be salty forever, and I don't get that mindset myself.
Well, and my thing is like the more I the more I study it, and then the more I have a conversation with people, I find myself getting frustrated. Now I don't consider myself a maxi per se, or toxic or anything like that, but
Mm.
I just find myself getting frustrated on it's like you're just focusing on the asset. You know, you're not focusing on the network, on all the wonderfulness of the network.
Right. The important properties it has that make it unique.
You can say the math and not just elliptic curves, but the math that underpins the whole system is what makes it able to be censorship resistant, able to be immutable, able to be permissionless. I mean, without that math underneath it, without that cryptography, it is just an asset that could be on some SQL database, right?
Yep, pretty much. And the unique thing about Bitcoin too is the network has a cumulative proof of work. Um, so in essence, you can see how much energy has been put into creating each block and blockchain altogether. And essentially, we've heard Saylor describe it as a wall of encrypted energy, and that's a good way to put it, because there's any chain that comes along that's because you and I kind of know how it works, right? The two blocks are, if somebody else tried to fork it off and make a new coin, well, you need people to come with you to do that, because otherwise the main chain will just keep chugging along, because there's so
Yeah.
much proof of work. I've also heard it described as it's like a wonder of the world, because you can't fake the work that's been done to produce all the blocks.
Wow.
So it's a standing monument now, and like
That's only getting better.
we haven't talked about inscriptions lately, but like the original Genesis block had an inscription.
Correct.
That's kind of what you do on something that's big. You carve graffiti on it. Now, I don't think Satoshi knew that how big it was going to get. Had a feeling how big it was going to get. But yeah, I think of it as a living monument, and it literally every 10 minutes we add to monuments, and we know how fast
Literally
it's
every
going to grow.
transaction. Go ahead.
Exactly. Every 10 minutes we get a bunch of transactions, and the difficulty adjustment too. For your listeners that aren't listening, essentially, if more hash power comes onto the network, it becomes harder to mine Bitcoin. And the reason that is a genius move is because it assures that every 10 minutes, a new block is mined on average, which means the issuance is constant despite how much mining pressure there is or isn't. The issuance remains constant. And every 2 weeks, roughly, it's adjusted. And it's done an amazing job, adjusting up or down, keeping the block times at 10 minutes. It hasn't really strayed too much far past that. And if it does, it just adjusts. The block times at 10 minutes are extremely important, because then the Bitcoin is released we know exactly how fast it's going to be released, regardless of how much power comes or doesn't. So the difficulty adjustment's also mind-blowingly genius programming move.
I'm picturing like when you're saying all this, like a bunch of workers like building this monument,
Mm-hmm.
and they're building in the rain, snow, sleet, all inclement weather, and they're not taking breaks. It's just like this constant growth of, like you said. I love that idea of a monument, because it really is. It's a monument to everything that we want to store. Every piece of information that we think is important enough to store, we try and fit in that, which kind of brings up the conversation of like, what should we store in there? But back to without getting into that, the math that you're describing makes it so that anybody can put anything in there that they want, if they're willing to either do the work or pay for it, or
Yeah, if you want to pay for block space, you can inscribe in wherever you want. You can send your mom a note, but it'll cost you some money, to get it in that block.
So when you say inscription, I'm guessing most people probably have a very surface level of what that is. Without getting too deep into that, could you kind of give us a quick description?
Yeah. So what an inscription is on Bitcoin has only been it's only been a thing recently within the last couple of years. So as you may remember, a few years ago, we activated SegWit on Bitcoin, which allowed for a different kind of address, cheaper sends and stuff like that. And the reason we wanted SegWit is it helped deal with some of the block size and scaling issues. It allowed the block size to go a little bit higher with SegWit. And on top of SegWit, we could build Lightning, and Lightning's been built up the last few years. And recently, I think it was last year, maybe 21, 22, but Taproot, which is another Bitcoin upgrade, was activated on the main chain. And then some people realized, hey, with Taproot, I can put in some arbitrary textual data into my transaction, as long as I pay for how much space I'm taking up. So you could take up a whole lot of space in a block and essentially inscribe or copy and paste whatever data you want in that block, and then that becomes part of your transaction. So it's called an inscription because it's essentially like you're spray painting a block, like a block got mined and you have some spray paint on it.
Well, and Satoshi's first one, Satoshi was here, where he did the Chancellor on the Brink. So yes. that make just a nerdy type of history question. Did Satoshi have to pay for that himself?
The answer is yes. He paid for the electricity that was used to mine that block.
And I'm wondering, like, is there a sizable amount difference that he had to pay as if he didn't put that in there? I mean, it was the first block, right? So
I don't think the second block was mined. Like the Genesis block was mined, and then the second block wasn't mined for a while later. I don't remember exactly how long.
Yeah. Okay,
let's see. What else you got? Did you want me to talk about models? I can talk about models briefly.
Yeah. So in all this talk, there's we just kind of talked about price and the logarithmic exponential growth of that. We got into the math, like you say, the math under the hood. Now we have a lot of different models coming out, and we had the stock to flow for a while, which I don't think is wrong per se in the idea of stock versus flow in general, but I think it was just a very tight model that needed, if it broke too much one way or the other, it kind of invalidated it. But now we have a new model. And what's your thoughts on this?
It's kind of intriguing, really, the power law model, because there's some things in nature that line up very nice with the power law model over a couple of orders of magnitude. And I don't know, it's somewhat convincing when you look at it that I think the last model that we're talking about was the log model. So like the time is also in a log scale, and then the price is in a log scale. And it looks like the price follows like essentially a straight line slope up, kind of deviating from it once in a while, but essentially staying pretty close to that line.
So back to when we were looking at your CoinGecko, we were looking at the price. So that would be the y-axis, the up and down, correct?
Yes.
In logarithmic terms, but the time was just linear, right?
Yes.
So it was just showing just day after day or month or year after year, whatever. So what you're saying is when we look at both logarithmic on the price and logarithmic on the time, what's the takeaway from there? What do we see? We see basically
it almost looks like a straight line up with a few humps, essentially once per cycle, for what I remember. Because I remember seeing it, and like as you go to from left to right, they get a little bit shorter. So like the last 4-year cycle is only this big. The first 4-year cycle, like I'm visualizing, is like this big, and then they get a little bit smaller.
So is that diminishing
But it still kind of
returns
the graph essentially still looks like that
or
with a few
diminishing
deviations.
volatility?
So yeah, some of the like the blow off top in 2017 was above it, uh, but it follows the corridor pretty well.
So
And I think
is that diminishing returns or diminishing volatility?
well,
It doesn't
if you
imply,
assume
I
it
guess.
follows the power law model, I don't know if the volatility is going to decrease. Because the power law model essentially is going to be increasing over time. Uh, and there's some models that kind of like the power law model is going to do this, right? It's just going to keep going, going, going up.
Mhm.
There's certain other models I've seen too that kind of flatten out, as you
Yeah.
go left to right.
Okay, so hold on. If we rewind back to what we were talking about earlier with uh, Bitcoin has no top because fiat has no bottom, then it what's the benefit of the power law if part of it is being measured in dollars anyway? That's always inflating and always uh, changing over time.
Right. So let me make a few comments on that. For for right now, I don't think it doesn't make a huge difference. But in 10 years, the chart might not work anymore because of what you mentioned. They could print a whole bunch of dollars to try to cover all this debt and inflate it, inflate it all the way, inflate it all the way. Um, how was I gonna? I had another point though. Yeah, so I remember what it was. So I remember seeing the chart too, and I think it's the like essentially from recently until 15 years ago. So like essentially the whole lifetime of Bitcoin was the input for this model, right?
Yeah,
So the way models essentially work is near, let's say you do 0 to 15 years, right? So 15 to 16 years, the model is going to be pretty good. So the price can't deviate too far from your model in 1 year. Okay,
right.
maybe 2 years later, you could see a little deviation. Um,
The
that's one
farther
thing
out
I was going to
time you go, the less accurate it is, and that's kind
essentially,
of
yeah.
like kind of what Black-Scholes model is all about in terms of like option pricing.
Yeah, so it's almost like predicting the weather. Like tomorrow, we're pretty sure what it's going to do tomorrow. But 10 days from now, 20 days from now, it's way less certain. Um, that's why the power law is kind of intriguing, though, because it uses 10 years of data. And for now, it looks like it's on a pretty good march. Um, and ultimately, at the end of the day, people make these models just to make predictions. Because they want to see, okay, based on all this, right, what's it going to do later? And how accurate am I? How confident am I in that number? So it's one of the, let's see, I counted a bunch of models that before we came on today, how many different models I'd seen to model the price of Bitcoin. The first one I remember ever seeing is stock to flow. Um,
Wasn't the
and I
rainbow
thought
chart
stock to flow
before
is pretty
then?
interesting. What's that?
The rainbow chart. I thought the rainbow chart was before.
I don't remember seeing the rain bar chart till after though. I
Oh,
don't
okay.
think I saw it till I joined Twitter, and I saw
Twitter
the
ruins
stock to
everything.
flow before I joined Twitter. I think so. I think
Okay.
I'd seen it first. But yes, there's the stock to flow. There's the rainbow chart, and I believe that one's a logarithmic regression. So what that means is the slope becomes less steep as time goes on, which would imply longer time to get the same return. So that would
Yeah.
imply diminishing returns. The power law, which is recently, there's also one of my personal favorites is the hyperbolic one. I don't
Is
know
that
if
the
I
stock to
haven't.
FOMO one?
I've not messed with stock to FOMO, but that just sounds funny. Come on.
Yeah.
But the hyperbolic one here, I'll draw it on a piece of paper and I'll just hold it up to the camera. The hyperbolic one's my favorite because essentially it looks like this. So
Hockey
you
stick.
model Bitcoin's price data, and from essentially start to here, it's like that. But not only does it not slow down, it turns upwards here. And
That's the stock to FOMO.
I think this is what it's going to do because of the massive inflation that's going to be coming. They're going to inflate. We can't keep adding $1 trillion to the debt every 100 days, man. Like you and I both know, they're going to print, and when they start printing, beep, I think it could do that. Um,
So not only is it the network is a wall of encrypted energy, do you then believe in Saylor's other quote about how it acts like a battery, like Bitcoin, the asset can act like an ever charging battery?
it can actually. Um, time-wise, to see we're getting close. But that's okay. Just one more
Yeah,
point
no,
on this, because excuse me, you've heard about the folks in Texas. They have all these Bitcoin miners hooked up to the grid, right?
yeah,
And they have an agreement where if the power price gets too high, they just shut off. So like when the power price spikes, the miners are shut off their miners, however much they want to shut off, all, some, or none, and then all that electricity we're using goes back to the grid. So essentially, it does act as a battery because they're consuming all this. When the power is cheap, they're consuming all of it, right? But then they can easily shut the machines off when they need to, when the price spikes, so that they save money on mining electricity, and then people who really need the power, I'm not going to
sure.
really need, uh, can get it. And that's a really interesting application that I don't think people have really fully grasped yet, because that makes our grids more resilient. It makes them more redundant. It makes them less likely to fail because we'll have this excess generation that we can turn on if we need to. I've heard other people say on podcasts that Bitcoin mining is nice because there's no other industrial things you can do where you just shut them off and then you start them back up immediately and no problems. A lot of things have to like shut down, cool down, warm back up, send the crew home, whatever it is. Bitcoin, you can just turn them off. When you're ready to mine again, power price comes down, you turn them back on. So that's another really cool thing Bitcoin's in. We didn't even talk about the environment, but they used to be concerned about the environment. Turns out Bitcoin is amazing for the environment. It consumes all the cheap energy. It consumes stranded energy.
Well, and that's the thing that most people don't understand. They'll hear the big old, oh, it takes up more energy than this city or this country or whatever. And it's like, wait a minute, isn't like 30 or 40% of all the world's energy that's produced, isn't it wasted or stranded? So right now it's not even getting a fraction of that.
Yeah, it's a decent percent, and they're not. Most of the electricity coming on using Bitcoin too is, we've seen from data, is mostly renewables because they're more efficient. So if you have cheap electricity, you should be mining Bitcoin with it. I personally don't. I pay
Not yet.
normal rates.
Not
But
yet.
around the world, if you have an energy source that's stranded, it's becoming more viable to be able to monetize that and also add to the network.
I love it.
So
I love
it's
it.
kind of a little tangent at the end, but I know Bitcoin just doing so many good things. You can't possibly cover them all.
No, you can't. And that's honestly part of the reason I started this is to not only help people early in their journey understand it, but also help myself understand it. Like I find the math fascinating. I wish I would have paid attention and not been staring at butterflies in school. I blame the ADHD, but you know what? That's why we got you, Will.
Exactly.
Um,
Us Bitcoiners like Renaissance men, anyways. We like to be good at lots of things.
I
And in
dig
my
that.
experience, all the Bitcoin folks I've met are good at multiple things because don't you want to keep learning and keep doing new stuff? Like that's what life's about, right?
When you stop learning, yeah, you're dead. And speaking of a Renaissance man, you see the guitar in the background. I've had the pleasure of playing with Will, and I'm looking forward to getting back to that. We need to work
I'm
up our
down,
set.
man.
Yeah. All right. Well, Will Cragoe, professor, Lincolnland Bitcoin co-host. Glad to have you on the pod. We will see you soon, hopefully at the next meetup. And thank you for coming on Zoom Out.
Sure thing. Sounds good. Thanks, Tim.